Wow, that last video got pretentious. I referenced Beowulf, I used Beethoven for the backing track, damn it, I spoke Latin. I gotta humble myself so you guys don't think I have ideas above my station. What to talk about? Oh, I know. To my shame, I am a big fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise. Call it Ubislop, call it poor taste, but the ability to inhabit historical settings and carry out simple plots of vengeance on historical figures of the day appeals directly to the side of me that loves to spend 8 hours staring at a Paradox map game. And no game in this near 20-year-old franchise frustrates that side of me more than 2014's Assassin's Creed Rogue. I've always had my issues with this game, but over the Christmas period I replayed it for 100% completion, and that roughly 25-hour experience compelled me to make this video, because here's the irony. Assassin's Creed Rogue sells itself as the other side of the story, finally telling the story of the franchise's villains, the Templars, and adding nuance to the series' central conflict. But not only does it fail to achieve this goal by half, it also presents a narrative that is insultingly basic, a conflict that is as black and white as you can imagine, and fails to leave any lasting impression other than that was mercifully short. Now, to be clear, I don't expect an Assassin's Creed game to be a masterpiece. I like to come at these games expecting only what they're selling to me, which is typically a simple stealth action experience in a detailed historical setting. The problems I have with Rogue, however, come from how it fails to achieve the idea that it is selling. For those unfamiliar, the Assassin's Creed franchise tells the story of a millennia-old conflict between two opposing secret societies: the Assassins, who fight for liberty and free will, and the Templars, who seek order and control. This conflict spans the centuries, with both sides lurking in the shadows of human civilization, manipulating events to gain access to powerful artifacts known as Pieces of Eden, magical items that survive from the days of a long-dead precursor race. Rogue specifically seeks to tell the story of Shay Cormac, an assassin who, against the backdrop of the 7 Years' War, turns from his brotherhood to join the Templars. So naturally here the intention is to take a simple conflict of good and evil and layer it with nuance to explore both sides and complicate the series. But that exact idea of complicating the series is what Rogue shies away from, leaving a narrative that is ultimately quite cold and meaningless. And this shying is a natural result of trying to complicate a conflict without letting it impact future games. You see, Shay turns away from the Assassins upon discovering that the artifacts they are trying to retrieve cause earthquakes when they are removed from their ancient pedestals, causing massive destruction in Lisbon and Haiti. Shay pleads with the colonial assassin's mentor Achilles to leave these artifacts alone so that people can live without buildings falling on them, a fairly reasonable request. However, Achilles, presumably desperate for power after the recent death of his wife and young son Connor, refuses and makes clear his intention to continue retrieving these artifacts, leading to Shay abandoning the Assassins and eventually joining the colonial right of the Templar Order, wiping out the colonial assassins and leaving Achilles bitter and crippled. It should be clear at this point how comically black and white this plot is. This is not a conflict between flawed groups representing opposing ideals. This is one guy wants to kill everyone, and all the other guys don't want him to kill everyone. Every attempt at layering Shay's story going forward inevitably runs into the blockage of this monochromatic conflict. And it's very strange, since there are genuine angles one could take to critique the Assassins, or at least present them as less than angelic. For example, take their recruitment strategies. Of the myriad assassins we see as our protagonists across this series, most of them come to be assassins through one of two paths. Number 1, they are taken into the Brotherhood as children and raised to believe in its ideals, like Jacob and Evie from Syndicate, or former series protagonist Desmond Miles. Or, number 2, they lose someone dear to them and join the Brotherhood to exact vengeance for their loved ones, eventually coming to believe the Brotherhood's goals are their own, like Ezio, Connor, Arno, frankly the majority of the rest of the assassins. One of these is indoctrination and the other is manipulation. These are cult recruitment strategies in action. Now, of course, we as an audience know that the assassins are not acting maliciously in this regard, but from an in-universe perspective, this is a perfect angle of attack to poke holes in the idea that the assassins are purely good and righteous, and this is just one of many possible such angles. But the reason for why this plot is so dumbfoundingly simple is ultimately the same as the reason why the modern day element of the series has never really mattered. These games are not individual works of fiction, they are created to fill a space in a franchise. Rogue in particular is very guilty of this. It serves to fill the gap between the ends of Assassin's Creed 4 and the start of Assassin's Creed 3, to show what events led to the downfall of the colonial assassins and how the series' best side character, Adewale, an escaped slave turned pirate turned assassin, eventually met his end. It doesn't even stop at just doing that though, as the game is also secretly a prologue for Assassin's Creed Unity, ending with Shay killing the French assassin Charles Dorian, starting the chain of events that lead to Charles's son Arno becoming an assassin himself. This need to tie into so many games at once ultimately only serves to weaken the story being told in Rogue. Take for example the fate of Achilles. For the plot of Assassin's Creed 3 to occur, Achilles needs to end up a reclusive, crippled old man due to the events of Rogue, and so, after killing all of the other colonial assassins, Kesegawase, Hope, the Chevalier, even his closest companion Liam, Shay is forced to make the decision to spare Achilles, even though it was his actions that led to the deaths that Shay spent the whole game trying to prevent. Similarly, Adewale, whose death in this game is by necessity supposed to be a big moment, is kept insulated from the main plot, serving as more of a bystander, expressing no knowledge of the assassin's connection to the dual earthquakes, because for him to know and do nothing would be out of character, but for him to fight against the assassins would complicate the plot too much. These are just two examples of the odd shapes this game has to twist itself into to fit into the place in the series canon that it occupies, disparate elements being thrown together haphazardly in the hopes of bridging so many gaps at once. And it's not like this is the series' only attempt at more morally ambiguous themes. Assassin's Creed 3 has a whole section of its story devoted to the assassin Connor working with his Templar father Haytham and their ill-fated attempts to bridge the gap between Templar and assassin ideals. And while your mileage with that story choice may vary, given Haytham's actions up to that point, it is a far more compelling narrative sequence to play through than what if the good guys and bad guys swapped sides for a game. Similarly, Assassin's Creed 4 presents some moral ambiguity outside of the framing of the Assassin-Templar conflict through its protagonist Edward Kenway, a pirate who dismisses the Assassin's cause in pursuit of riches and glory, only to watch the world of the pirate Golden Age come crashing down around him, leading him to finally join the Assassins in their struggle against the colonizer-aligned Templars. These are fairly basic examples of quote-unquote moral ambiguity, but they are examples that actually work within their context. They show imperfect characters who make poor decisions because of their flawed desires, a kind of story that will always feel more human and relatable than I have to stop the bad man because he wants to destroy the world for reasons. I mentioned earlier the habit the series has of falling back on the recruited to the assassins after the loved one is killed backstory, but the reason this is so preferred by the franchise is because it is an easy to write, understandable emotional conflict that people will be able to connect with and enjoy. The cliches are cliches because they work. Characters doing random things for nonsense reasons does not. It's a real shame too, since the game's historical setting, the 7 Years' War, is one that is rife for further exploration of the ideas put forward in Assassin's Creed 3 to do with the Templars' relationship to indigenous populations and their involvement with European colonial agendas, since the 7 Years' War ended with many Spanish and French colonies being handed over to the British Empire. Rogue even briefly features the Templar William Johnson, who, in Assassin's Creed 3, attempts to purchase native land ostensibly to protect them from colonial violence. Instead of expanding on any of these ideas, however, Rogue instead spends its limited runtime focused on Templars like George Monroe, who are presented as just being nice, honourable, decent people, in contrast to the game's assassins, who are all petty, vengeful, and unempathetic. Instead of making this an honest attempt at adding material nuance to a purely ideological conflict, we are just given good guys versus bad guys, but they wear different colours. And this is what I find so frustrating about Rogue specifically. It's not just a mediocre acid flip of Black Flag meant to tie into the new and shiny Unity, it's a narrative that fundamentally fails to achieve the potential that it has been given. A time period and a conflict ripe for exploration of the complicated systems of 18th century colonialism gives way to a game that cannot bring itself to do anything but condemn its antagonists from start to finish. An AC game where one plays as a Templar is a unique opportunity, one that has never been presented since, to understand why someone might be attracted to join such a typically evil group. To understand what perspective might lead one to agree with totalitarian order over anarchistic freedom. But Rogue is nothing more than a short bit of fluff meant to bridge the gap between two eras of a franchise, failing itself on its own premise. And this is not unique to the Assassin's Creed franchise. It's an illness that creeps into all franchises, as we previously discussed with Captain America 4. As corporate profit margins grow, complexity must be flattened to fit these products onto an assembly line. When an artistic endeavour is reduced to merely a way to fill a release date, or a useful tool to connect dots between old and new entries of a series, even genuinely promising premises get reduced down to making the assassins mustache-twirlingly evil, which doesn't just make for a boring story, it actively sabotages the game's own unique selling point. We can't explore the Templar philosophy if the only reason to join them is because the other guys are cartoon villains. And that's kind of it for this video. I know I don't usually cover video games on the channel, but I do play a lot of them, and replaying Rogue over the Christmas season made me think of all the ways in which this game annoys me. Needless to say, I hope you enjoyed this brief sojourn, and if you did, feel free to hit the like or subscribe to let me know, and maybe I'll cover more video game narratives in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.